Yeah, apparently I wasn't done with Harry Potter after the response video to the Dom that I made a while back, because here we are again. We all know Harry Potter. For half of us, it was possibly the greatest thing about our childhoods, and for the rest of us, I'm afraid that all I can say is that you're only lying to yourself. But this is not really about possibly the greatest contribution to children's pop literature of the past few decades. No, this is about a bigger phenomenon, best exemplified by the rather troubled post-Deathly Hallows legacy that has started to, for many people, reflect back negatively on those original doorstop-length books which gripped the children of the world for a decade and a half, which I did briefly touch on in a previous video. So, to begin, of course, we must first talk about Orson Scott Card and Roland Barthes, because I paid through the nose for my useless degree, and I'll be damned if I let that go to waste, and also because it's extremely relevant to the topic at hand, but mostly that first thing. Death of the Author and Ender's Game. In case you were unaware, Orson Scott Card is the man behind Ender's Game, a classic science fiction novel. Technically it's a series, but let's be honest here, no one's ever read the others, with themes of isolation, abuse and war, and is particularly relevant today in the era of drone warfare against dehumanized enemies, which for obvious reasons has over the years garnered a large following, including a lot of gay teens who identified and empathised with the protagonist's struggles, feelings of isolation and abuse at the hands of family members, and many used it as the escapist fiction it was. The problem with this is that Card turned out to be a raging homophobe. On his blog, his bigoted conservative views were showcased for all to see, and it was not pretty. So the question we are then faced with is quite simply, what do we do about this contradiction? Can someone who Card sees as less deserving of equal rights still enjoy his work without a niggling feeling of unease as they read it with that context? Well, that's where Barthes comes in. In his now famous essay Death of the Author, Barthes argued that authorial intent frankly doesn't matter, and that the interpretation of a work is entirely on the part of the audience, and regardless of what an author may say about it, or even how they view the world outside of their art, is irrelevant. J.K. Rowling may be a Blairite status quo warrior who occasionally tweets random bits of trivia about the world she created, but didn't actually bother to write into the total 1,084,170 words she actually published. Pottermore, whilst technically canon and an extremely interesting case, is a similar thing in my mind. No one should have to read a fucking encyclopedia to understand the stuff you couldn't be asked to write about at the time. But does that affect the way we read Harry Potter with this context? Barthes would argue that it shouldn't, but that doesn't mean that it won't. The reader is the space on which all the quotations that make up a writing are inscribed, without any of them being lost. A text's unity lies not in its origin, but in its destination, yet this destination cannot any longer be personal. The reader is, without history, biography, psychology, he is simply that someone who holds together in a single field all the traces by which the written text is constituted. Classic criticism has never paid any attention to the reader. For it, the writer is the only person in literature. We know that to give writing its future, it is necessary to overthrow the myth. The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. Death of the Author and Harry Potter. But that's just one aspect of this issue. Rowling is no Orson Scott Card. She may be someone I thoroughly disagree with, has far too much money, and therefore will receive just as much disdain from me as any other billionaire, and yes, she is a billionaire again, but really that's not a huge issue when reading her books. She is not writing blog posts decrying equal marriage rights, although she is a neoliberal who famously lived as a single mother on benefits for many years, and then railed against Jeremy Corbyn, who was at the time promising to help those in similar situations, prompting many people to refer to the incident as Harry Potter and the pulled up ladder. Although there is of course the issue with the goblins, and exactly which ethnic group they're intended to represent, to the point where there is literally a Star of David on the floor of Gringotts. So really, reading Goblet of Fire, it's not like I get halfway through and think, hey wait, the author tweeted something shitty 6 months ago, fuck this, and tossed the book aside. However, the fact that the Fantastic Beasts movie have played a cruel trick on us by letting us believe that the villain was going to be played by the fantastic actor and generally pleasant seeming fellow Colin Farrell, who did a fantastic job as always, only to cruelly rip him away and reveal that the true villain of the series was Johnny, possibly literally a wife beater, Depp, who nowadays is so much of a lazy actor that he had his lines fed to him through an earpiece in Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides instead. However, does tarnish many people's opinions of her somewhat, especially when she actually came out and defended the decision to keep him on for the rest of the series rather than recast, which has precedent, just ask Michael Gambon, or making up some magical bullshit to make sure he's played by a different actor in The Crimes of Grindelwald. Changing canon and the nature of prequels. Something I find interesting is the issue of the stories that have come after Harry Potter ended. The official play, movies, etc., and how they they retroactively affect the original books in interesting ways. Firstly, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which you probably remember for one of two reasons. One, you heard about all the fucking stupid, canon-breaking, convoluted time travel bullshit plot. Or two, you saw the weirdly racist fan outrage about the fact that they cast Hermione as a black woman. Oh boy, this fucking play. I hear the effects were good, and they fucking better be to make up for all the things wrong with it. I won't go into all the problems I have with it here because that's been done to death elsewhere, and it's not really relevant, although seriously, fucking time travel and Voldemort's secret daughter, were they high when they came up with this idea? But suffice to say that it was extremely bad and changed the way that a lot of the world of Harry Potter works. So, how do we read the original books, now that official canon states that the Trolley Witch, a character who in the original stories basically only exists to sell confectionery, is some kind of magical guardian who seems to live an abnormally long life, at least 190 years, can use pumpkin pasties as grenades, and turn her hands into horrific monster claws in order to threaten students who attempt to escape the train. There's speculation that she's some kind of golem or something. So when we first see her in Philosopher's Stone, when we see Harry buy all the magical sweets he has off her, we're now worried that if he pisses her off, like for example buying all her sweets so no one else can get any, like the selfish bourgeois brat he is, she might turn into her monster form and rip his fucking arms off or something. Or, perhaps more accurately, when in Chamber of Secrets, the solemn guardian of the nation's magical children notices a magical flying car following the Hogwarts Express, she might decide to defend it with all her power, potentially murdering 2 preteen boys in the process. Roof of the Hogwarts Express. The wind whistles from all angles, and it's a fierce wind at that. Albus! The Trolley Witch, you want a snack for the journey? No, Albus. The Trolley Witch is coming towards us. No, she can't be. We're on top of the train. Scorpius points Albus in the right direction, and now he can see the Trolley Witch, who approaches nonchalantly, pushing her trolley. Anything from the trolley, dears? Pumpkin pasty? Chocolate frog? Cauldron cake? Oh, people don't know much about me. They buy my cauldron cakes, but they never really notice me. I don't remember the last time someone asked my name. What is your name? I've forgotten. All I can tell you is that when the Hogwarts Express first came to be, Ottiline Gamble herself offered me this job. That's 190 years. You've been doing this job for 190 years. These hands have made over 6 million pumpkin pasties. I've got quite good at them, but what people haven't noticed about my pumpkin pasties is how easily they transform into something else. She picks up a pumpkin pasty. She throws it like a grenade. It explodes. And you won't believe what I can do with my chocolate frogs. Never. Never have I let anyone off this train before they reached their destination. Some have tried. Sirius Black and his cronies, Fred and George Weasley, all have failed because this train, it doesn't like people getting off it. The Trolley Witch's hands transfigure into very sharp spikes. She smiles. So please retake your seats for the remainder of the journey. This of course goes double for all the changes and additions in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, although an argument could be made that it's only movie canon, not necessarily with the books. And as the series goes on, it seems like it'll get more and more intimately involved with the mainstream Harry Potter books. And if the trailer for The Crimes of Grindelwald is anything to go by, Dumbledore is going to play a large part, so it looks like we're finally going to see what the particularly famous defeat of the Dark Wizard Grindelwald in 1945 might actually look like. And whilst that may seem like a great idea to many, I would disagree. To me it seems a lot more like pulling back the curtain to reveal a sad-looking man operating an old-timey radio, or to put it another way, just because something mentioned in the original sounded cool, that doesn't mean it has to be explored in the prequels, because it will almost certainly be less awesome than merely suggesting it and allowing the audience's imagination to make up the details. A great example of this is the Clone Wars, first mentioned by Ben Kenobi in the original Star Wars.
No, my father didn't fight in the wars. He was a navigator on a spice freighter.
That's what your uncle told you. He didn't hold with your father's ideals, thought he should have stayed here and not gotten involved.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father.
I wish I'd known him.
He was the best star pilot in the galaxy. And a cunning warrior. I understand you've become quite a good pilot yourself. And he was a good friend.
Which had fans imagining what that could possibly have meant, to the point of the original EU inventing 2 different clones of Luke Skywalker called, and I am not kidding when I say this, Luke and Luke. You know, just in case you forgot which one was the original, just count the U's in the name. And of course ended up with the prequel trilogy messing up a lot of the established movie canon.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy this Sith, not join them! Bring balance to the Force! Not leave it in darkness! I hate you! You were my brother! Anakin! I loved you!
And he was a good friend.
Some of which ended up being redeemed in the Clone Wars cartoon, which is perfect in every way, and I will fucking fight you if you disagree. Guilty pleasures. None of this is to suggest that liking something that might be considered problematic, or created by an author you may or may not find morally repugnant, is inherently a bad thing. If you're able to disassociate art from artists, then quite frankly all the more power to you. It's interesting because whilst I do struggle to enjoy some art created by objectionable people, others I have a sort of grudging enjoyment of. This, of course, is the definition of a guilty pleasure. Something you know you shouldn't like, but for whatever reason find yourself actively enjoying. For me, it's Diantwoord. Diantwoord? I don't know, I'll probably just put in a clip of them saying it here anyway.
Die fucking aardwoord. It's my name.
I've been a reluctant fan for years, and only recently found out that on top of being trashy and a little bit weird, they do shit like this. Which, like, come on. Everyone knows that's not okay. Oh, and this is their attempt at dealing with the serious issue of a tribal tradition in South Africa of circumcising young boys in the bush with no anaesthetic and often with unsterilised equipment, which has resulted in many an infection and death. Classy. On the upside, I am 100% convinced that their song Daddy is a great example of deconstructionist art, which takes aim at consumerism and the various ways in which capitalism breaks down our humanity. Daddy is capitalism. And you cannot convince me otherwise. Concluding thoughts. Such is the nature of prequels, I suppose, and sequels too, to an extent, at least if done badly. So I suppose the question we have to ask ourselves is quite simply this: can we ignore the aspects of a particular canon or continuity that we don't like, or that negatively affect the actual story we're reading? Does being aware of how irritating a young Anakin Skywalker was rob Darth Vader of some of his threatening power? Does knowing that Luke Skywalker becomes a bitter, jaded old man who, yes, does see the error of his ways in The Last Jedi, who in a moment of weakness creates the next Sith Lord, or Sith-adjacent individual anyway, later in life, negatively affect the way we watch him in the original 3 Star Wars movies? It shouldn't, because The Last Jedi is a masterpiece. Does knowing that Obi-Wan used to hang out in a space 50s diner tarnish the way we see old Ben Kenobi? Likewise, can we pretend that Voldemort and Bellatrix didn't fuck when we reread their interactions? Can we pretend that everything that happened in that fucking play just didn't? Can we forget that the Trolley Witch is an immortal golem monster when Harry buys all her shit without thinking about anyone else who might be feeling peckish? Will we be able to read Dumbledore's chocolate frog card without the weight of the unnecessary context, ruining the intentionally vague nature of the original description? And outside the confines of the fictional universe, can we truly continue to ignore that a story in which a charismatic boy born into wealth doesn't share any of it and later becomes a magic policeman in a society which, when you start to think about it, seems a little fascisty, was written by a neoliberal who happens not to like politicians who pledge to help people in the situation she was lucky to escape with her Harry Potter success? Can we pretend not to know that the man being paid more than most people will earn in a lifetime to play the villain of the new Fantastic Beast movies, and the former lover of Dumbledore himself, is allegedly an alcoholic domestic abuser, and that Rowling is seemingly okay with this? Sadly, I'm afraid I don't have any solid answers, and all I can say is quite simply, it's down to you. It's something I would struggle with a lot more than I would like. Helpful, I know.